So why is community science important?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think it's almost philosophical, and then in other ways it's purely economic. So in the philosophical sense, I think the idea that everyone is a scientist and that everyone should have access to science is rooted in the concept of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so it's a tool that everyone uses. Making sure that people feel empowered to call themselves scientists. Well, people don't do that because they don't see themselves in a white lab coat holding a pipette with or they don't have a glassware where they're staring through it and it's yellow, but then they pour it, it's blue. Like, giving people space to claim the title of scientist, I think is important. But then I think the other issue is just that there are so many people who are talented biologists who are out there, who have been working at a company and then the company downsizes, or they work at a startup, but that startup disappears, or their job moves, and they're here. And so why not make it so that there is a place that people can go to that takes advantage of this pool of researchers who are here, that are otherwise not going to be able to take their skill set that they have, that they've worked on, and actually apply it.
My guest today is Dr. Andrew Scarpelli, Associate Professor at the School of the Art Institute, adjunct, also co-founder and president of ChiTownBio.
Yep.
Andy, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
It'll be great. I'd like to start by reading your personal statement, which states, "Science and technology are for everyone. It's important to create tools and environments where everyone can incorporate them into their lives and practices."
Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And credit to you for having created this facility that we're in currently, ChiTownBio.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, but we're getting there. But yeah, I think you have to kind of live out your ideals, and I do think science should be accessible to everyone, and it's not right now. So trying to figure out more ways to make sure that it is important.
Yeah. Can you talk about what ChiTownBio is? And
Yeah.
what is the mission of ChiTownBio?
So ChiTownBio is part of a larger global movement that is kind of a offshoot of the maker movement. So in the early 2000s, you saw a bunch of facilities pop up that would be like, if you're really into knitting, let's have a knitting club that has knitting spaces and has experts that can talk to you about this. And then we saw that turn into maker spaces that would have 3D printing and laser etching and all of these different high tech equipment. And so around the early parts of, I want to say, I don't want to get these dates wrong, but mid 2000 aughts, there were some groups that started to form that were thinking of how do we turn this into something that would be available for biologists. And so in New York, the first one of these was GenSpace. And it was founded by a couple of people, but two of the most important people for that were Dan Grushkin and Ellen Jorgensen, who were both part of this founding of that group. And so in 2011, I went to a conference in California, and Ellen Jorgensen was talking there about community bio. And what they were laying out was that we want to make sure that there are these spaces that people can explore biology on their terms, that there is all of this shared equipment, because most people aren't going to be able to afford a thermocycler at home, nice microscopes, centrifuges, incubators. These are just beyond what most people can accumulate on their own. But if you give people the tools to use them, and you give them the training to make sure that they're using them safely and that their community is safe, people can do really cool and amazing things. Ellen has a great TED Talk that's out there from, I think, around 2010, and she was just a really good evangelizer for creating these community spaces around the country. And what I think is fascinating is at the time that GenSpace was formed, and another community biolab also claims to be the first biocurious in the San Francisco Bay Area, who have the best name for one of the community biolabs. They both say that they were the first. I think that GenSpace organized first, but biocurious had it's a controversy that is absolute useless. But cool, one of them is the first, both of them are the first, I don't care. But they're both really cool institutions. And so there were a lot of these that popped up all over the country. And I think what's weird and interesting is that there was a movement in Chicago to build one of these, but it seems to have died out right before I heard about it. So I remember coming back from the conference and going, I'm gonna join whatever community is building this. And I found a Google group You remember Google Groups?
Oh yeah.
I'm dating myself with that. But went to the Google group for it, and I would post, hey, I want to help build this. And it seemed like the last person who had commented on the Chicago thread for a bio space in Chicago just seems to have stopped posting like about 4 months before I get there. And so I tried a couple times to build it on my own, really unsuccessfully. I did one attempt where I was just like, I'm just gonna start renting a space, it'll be cheap and it'll support itself in no time, which was dumb. And then in 2000 and I wanna say 12 or 13 or maybe even 14, again, do you remember the Red Eye? It was the free newspaper that you'd pick up to ride the L. They had a Big Ideas contest, and I was a finalist for a big idea of doing something in tech in Chicago. And we lost out to an app that matched dogs in shelters with people who'd want to, like, it was a dating kind of thing, which putting a community biolab up against someone who's helping people find puppies' homes was just, it was unfair. That was rigged. But I kind of gave up on the idea of trying to create one of these. And then there were 2 students at Northwestern right after I finished my PhD. So in 2016 or 17, that did a little bit of a talk, because there was a synthetic biology student group that would give talks to each other. And one of them had approached my former PI, Josh Leonard at Northwestern, and had said something along, we're gonna give a talk about community bio. And Josh said to them, oh, you need to reach out to Andy. He's tried this in Chicago. He'd be someone to get a hold of. And so they gave a talk at Northwestern about this community bio. There was another grad student and a postdoc in the audience, and they were like, all right, this seems cool, let's make this happen. And so they called me up. Most of the founders of this space, they got a hold of me, and so we kind of started to form this group of going, like, what does it take to build this? And so we started to just do events around town to just do pretty much basic science outreach, but about biotechnology. So we had a partner at, I like that I keep citing things that are gone. Empirical Brewing at Ravenswood and Foster had this mission statement that was kind of, we want to have the science of brewing very forward. And so they would let us just meet in their space, and we would do things where we would paint with bacteria, or we'd grow mushrooms, or we would make algae string, and just show people the different things that you can do with some biotechnologies in a really basic level. And we started to build a community. And I think we had a bunch of false starts getting a location. And I think we were really close at the end of 2019, and then the world blew up. And so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board. And so we got through the pandemic. We switched around our board a little bit. There were some people who left and came back and things like that. But in 2023, we started doing these biotech fermenters, these networking events for people in biotechnology to just interact with each other. There was a group that had moved their lab from the San Francisco Bay Area to Chicago, and apparently in the San Francisco Bay Area there are meetups for people in biotechnology every week. So that if you are in biotech and you have bought a bunch of equipment that you don't need, but you need these other equipments, you can talk to other labs, see if you can swap, share, figure out ways to, oh, this lab's shutting down, who's working there, can we bring them up onto our team? There's just this network, and there's nothing here in Chicago. As a matter of fact, on Eventbrite, I think it was Eventbrite or Meetup, they had searched for the hashtag biotech. And the only thing that came up was one of the outreach events that I do. We get little black lights and we go to the North Park Village Nature Center, and we talk to mainly kids, but it's a lot of families about during the pandemic, some people at the Field Museum took some black lights, just looked at through their archives and found out that duck-billed platypi glow bright blue under a black light, which is cool and weird. Yeah. And so we just thought this is a great way to get people to go out, explore nature, learn a little about fluorescence. And so we do this event every summer where we just go out and talk to kids about biofluorescence. We send them out, they go, they look, and they find a couple things. Mainly it's microplastics because everyone's wearing fluorescently dyed clothing. But we do this event every year, and we had hashtagged it biotechnology. And so when the person was coming from the San Francisco Bay Area looking for that community, we were all he found. And so he said, can you start up something similar? And I was always trying to figure out how to live up to our mission statement, make things more accessible. And I thought building up the biotech community would be a great way to do that. If we have more of an infrastructure where people who are interested can join in, that would be great. And so a friend of mine runs another organization called Scientist. I'm really tempted to shout out to Ryan Brown, but that feels so weird. But shout out to Ryan Brown. He runs Scientist, which is a group that's trying to find ways for graduate students, master's students who are in the sciences, mainly life sciences, but I think all the sciences, to find careers outside of academia. Because, I mean, when I was getting my PhD, I think that my program hired 2 or 3 tenure track professors, but we graduated 10 to 20 students a year. So if you just think about that, you're gonna need to start thinking about careers outside of academia. And so they were trying to help people do that. They still are, that's their mission. And so I reached out to him, I was like, do you wanna help me start doing these networking events? And so when we started doing these networking events, we met one of my board members, Brandon Neves, who has been integral in finding this space because his background is in economics and computer science, and he's working in realty at this point, real estate. But he was like, I'll help you find a space. And then we will build out that space together. And so Brandon's the treasurer of ChiTownBio at this point. He's integral to the working of this. But I think he lit a fire under us to go like, we've been saying we're gonna build this lab. We have the tools to do it. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm going to let it out at some point. So, but sorry. He was saying, let's do this. And I'm gonna leave out the swear at that point. Yeah. And so we said, all right, let's set up this lab and just see who comes. And I think what's been fun about the community bio movement in its current iteration is that there are about 10 community bio labs across the country right now. And there are a couple more that are nascent that are gonna be growing. Nascent? Nascent? Nascent. Nascent. They're nascent. They're going to be growing. You can leave in all of my horrible flubs because they are the way that I talk. But each of them, because they're community-based, they're going to reflect their community. And so GenSpace is where the Biodesign Challenge came out of. They have more of an art focus. I think that Casey, who's in charge of that, won't be offended by me saying that. And I think the spaces that are in more of a tech area, so places in the San Francisco Bay Area, seem very much more startup oriented, more geared towards working with the technology that's already there. There are some places like Bugs, who the Baltimore Underground Science Space is amazing. Lisa does a really great job running that space, but they're affiliated somewhat tenuously, but affiliated with Johns Hopkins because it's the big facility that's there. And so there is this more of a touchstone with academia, more of a touchstone with how to build it. And so there can be the more ground level work in their community, do things with teens, get people into that space. But each of them reflect their community. And so we built this space not quite knowing what community will show up. We would love it if we do have a bunch of bio artists and bio designers, especially since that's what I teach at the Art Institute. I'm familiar with that community. It would be cool if it was just pure biotechnologists, that there were people who are, I want to start startups, because it'd be great to have that power of economics behind Chicago, because I don't think that we have it right now, and it's absolute bullshit that we don't, because we should. Chicago is perfectly primed to be a biotech center, but it's not. And so if there are people who are just like, I want to start pumping this out, cool. How can we make that happen? How can we get people in here to do that? If it ends up being a bunch of citizen science project, if people come in tomorrow and go, we want to all work on engineering an avocado that never turns brown, which, I mean, that would be lovely. If everyone wanted to do that, cool, let's do it. So we're trying to make sure that we're having a really broad, functional molecular biology lab that anyone can come in and go, I want to start working on this. And if there's momentum, if they have other people that are excited to do it, if they have some early success and people just find out about it, we want to make sure that we can support them. And we don't want to ever compete with Portal or MHub or the different incubators around town. Our goal is getting some ideas off the ground so that they can get to Portal or MHub or 1871 or Matter or all these different incubators, and then turn it into something that we're not going to be able to do in the storefront, but that they might be able to build and then have part of the biotech community in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why is community science important?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think it's almost philosophical, and then in other ways it's purely economic. So in the philosophical sense, I think the idea that everyone is a scientist and that everyone should have access to science is rooted in the concept of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so it's a tool that everyone uses. If you go, a friend invites you to a new bar that you've never been to, we're in Rogers Park right now, and they go, let's go to a bar in Logan Square, and you're like, all right, I haven't been to Logan Square in a while. If I take the red line down to Fullerton, take the Fullerton bus over, I think it's gonna take me about 45 minutes. And you get there, and it takes 55 minutes. The next time you go, you're going to have, you had a hypothesis, you tested it, you have new data, you can reiterate. And so it's a very small version of that scientific method, but it's something that we all do all the time. I think I have time for breakfast today. I do not. I'm gonna have to set more time for this tomorrow. I think I'm gonna sleep better if I take a melatonin pill. No, that was shit. It didn't do anything. And so making sure that people feel empowered to call themselves scientists, well, people don't do that because they don't see themselves in a white lab coat holding a pipette with or they don't have a glassware where they're staring through it and it's yellow, but then they pour it and it's blue. Like, giving people space to claim the title of scientist, I think is important. But then I think the other issue is just that there are so many people who are talented biologists who are out there who have been working at a company and then the company downsizes, or they work at a startup but that startup disappears, or their job moves and they're here. And so why not make it so that there is a place that people can go to that takes advantage of this pool of researchers who are here, that are otherwise not going to be able to take their skill set that they have, that they've worked on, and actually apply it. I think what's so weird is how many times you meet people who met the love of their lives in grad school here, and then their partner finds a job, and then they're stuck here, but they don't really have the job opportunity that their partner has because of often sexism, but just random different things that are halting them from joining the workforce the same way. Wouldn't it be cool to give a space to them that they could work on an idea of their own that might lead to something? It might lead to nothing, but it allows them to connect with an aspect of who they are. It allows them to contribute to some kind of research that'll move forward. Maybe not in the grandiose way that we think of in academia, that they're writing all these papers, but in a way that might lead to a startup or inspire a citizen science project or get them to teach some of what they know to someone else. I think it's just, it's all of that. It's the economics, it's the philosophy, it's making sure that everyone feels like they can contribute to science however they want to, even if that felt like it was unavailable for them if they didn't have somewhere to go and do it.
And how do we create more citizen scientists then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think anyone has a really good answer for that, because I think you look at all the institutions that are trying to push the idea of citizen science, and I think maybe it's that we need to keep on changing the terminology. We need to go to the consulting groups that tell big companies how to trick people into thinking that they're responsible for climate change, but instead make them feel responsible for science and be actively participating in it. Because I think citizen science is already a term that people have become wary of, because it's adding a caveat to the idea of being a scientist. If we're saying everyone's a scientist, well, but you're not, George Church, or you're not, I'm trying to think of famous scientists that people would recognize if I were to say their name, and I feel
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins, or I'll go further back. I would love to do living scientists, but everyone that I can think of in my head, it's going to feel very niche for the field of synthetic biology, and I don't know if people will know them.
Jane Goodall.
Sure, but people don't think of themselves as those scientists, and so there's this caveat that we put into it. There is a qualifier, there is an apology in the word citizen scientist. You're not a scientist, you're a citizen scientist. And so I think for some people that's going to be really exciting. I can do this. But I think famous citizen scientists include people like Lord Kelvin and Benjamin Franklin, and people who are not, that was not their day job, but if America fails as an experiment, which I'm really hoping it doesn't, but I don't know, there's a current administration that seems to think maybe we can do that. But If America fails, one of the things that's going to be important for the history of the world is Benjamin Franklin's experiments with electricity. Like, his contribution to how we know what we know is going to be fundamental. And he wasn't a trained scientist. He did this as almost a hobby. And yet we can say Benjamin Franklin was a scientist and an inventor. He wasn't a citizen scientist. And so when we say, how do we encourage more people to get involved in science? I think that citizen science is already a problematic term. But if we do say, how do we get more citizen scientists in the way that we're saying, not going through academic training that lasts for decades or like long periods of time and going through the undergraduate, then the graduate, then the postdoc and all that experience. How do we just get people into sciences? I think there's a lot of great answers to that. And I think it's going to be a combination of all of them. We need to make sure that we are highlighting that, and I think this is going to be a little political, even though it should not be. We need to highlight that we need more voices. We need people coming from different backgrounds and different experiences, because every time you run into a problem, it's going to be informed by all the problems you've faced in the past. And so even coming from it that you had your parents not be able to afford a plumber for a little bit, and so you rigged up something, that might be really something essential for when there's problems in a lab. And that's an extreme case, but there's just the different things you run into, the problems you've come up with, the questions you've asked, the things you've run into in the past and when you were younger are going to be important for figuring out what new questions you can ask in a lab. So I think encouraging diversity, when people say that's not important for good science, they are either lying or they are so stuck in their own biases that they can't figure out the basics of just how encouraging more people to participate is going to be better for everyone. So that's one thing we could do. We could make it so that there is better lines of communication between those ivory towers where science happens, and allow people who are doing science to have that communication, so that it's not that all the scientists I can name, all the people that I worked with when I was getting my PhD, or the people who I run into who are at the University of Chicago or Northwestern or UIC or Loyola or DePaul or Northeastern or all the different research institutions, like, they are more accessible. They're in your everyday life. I think what's so weird is that, like, I'm pretty sure Linus Pauling was on like the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which is, I can't see a research scientist, a Nobel Prize winning scientist going on Jimmy Fallon and playing like, what's in a box? Like, I would feel somewhat insulted with that. But I think that it's fascinating to go back and watch Carl Sagan on like late night television and see scientists interacting with the public. And so I think getting rid of the ivory towers, and I'm not saying stopping cool research, but just making sure they're more accessible. Increasing education, which, again, I don't know why that's political all of a sudden, but like making sure people have access to good science. And I think that also defining what good science is. I really hate that we have a transphobic House of Representative member who put up a sign going like, there are two genders, trust the science, even though, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I'm too political, and I'm trying not to be, just because like science shouldn't need to be political, but it's become political because people will take the auspices of science. They'll take on the cloak and go like, now I'm a scientist because I took middle school biology and don't understand the idea that biological sex and gender are different. Biological sex is not a binary. Like, even if you were to take the most literal view of sex and just say like, all right, we're gonna characterize everyone by their chromosomal setup and say that's biological sex. Well, fuck, there are translocations of genes that are on the Y chromosome. There are people with chromosomal abnormalities like Klinefelter syndrome or XXX syndrome, who are everyday people. They're people you might not know have it, and they might be you, and you might not know about it. Sex is not a binary, and so why would gender, something that's informed by sex, also be? And then why would somebody be able to say, no, it's not, all of this is false, there are two genders, and that's science? So I think telling people what science is something that we've done a shitty job doing. Because if someone can put up that poster and no one will go like, you're an idiot. And I'm not saying that to belittle them, it's just someone who's proud of their misunderstanding should be publicly ridiculed. And not in the mean way, but just in a way to say like, you are doing something bad. What are you doing? And I think that we haven't given people the tools to be able to recognize that. We have so many people who can mischaracterize science and then go like, but it's science. And the idea that climate change is that there are good arguments on both sides. No, there aren't. No, there aren't. When we say that there is the vast majority of scientists who believe in climate change, and there is the vast majority of data that is showing this is a real thing and human-caused climate change, the fact that people are still like, well, science isn't really sure. I've heard there's one scientist who thinks that all of the climate change comes from like, I don't know, well, no, they wouldn't know what the Milankovitch cycles are. I don't know, the Earth just sometimes getting lost in the solar system. Like the fact that we haven't given people enough tools to know, all right, that's insane. And I think it also goes to the way that we do academic publishing. The fact that I teach at the School of the Art Institute, when I assign my students papers, they hate it. They absolutely hate it, because science papers are written for scientists to other scientists, because scientists are going to be approving those. It's how science realizes what should go up and down. And then if you publish, you're going to get more grants. And those grants are written in the same exact voice. And so they expect that same tone. And then if you get grants, you have the money to publish. And so it becomes this cycle that you get better and better at being pedantic. And that makes it harder and harder for everyone to understand what the fuck you're talking about when you publish. And so I think really simple solutions like having scientific papers have sure, you can do your pedantic, like, I'm only going to use terms that have 18 syllables in them paper, but then have a one-page summary that goes, this is what we found. This is why it's important. Here's links to the data that's just accessible to you, someone who's not going to be so excited that I properly use the word, I don't know, I'm trying to think of fancy terms now, and it's tricky somehow. Because I think that's the other thing. I'm trying to be a better science communicator, and it is trying to not use terms like steric inhibitor of enzyme kinetics, but instead going like, something that's just going to block machinery in your body from working just based on the shape and size. Like, you get used to talking about it in other ways, but maybe steric inhibition is something that we shouldn't have to have be the baseline of understanding for someone to read a paper that's just saying that we found a new drug that will work by working with the specific enzyme that it fits in perfectly into, so that it can stop it from interacting with something else that could be bad for your health. Like, instead of putting this into really grandiose terms and making it as ridiculously pedantic as possible, having it accessible to people is important. Sorry, I have so many different thoughts on this, and so I think like 20 minutes ago you asked me like, how do we encourage more citizen science? I objected to the question. I went off on like 18 tangents. It's a great question, and I don't think we have enough people thinking about it. And I think what sucks is that oftentimes you'll have someone go like, I have one answer to this, and then we'll be like, let's put all of our effort into one answer to that. I remember there was a journal that was like, we're going to draw an illustration on every paper, and it's great because having that diagram is amazing. Having an illustration that would be easy for people to understand, cool. But then that started to become, well, let's put in a bunch of jargon in those images now. And so there was a great idea. Instead of figuring out why that was a good idea, instead of expanding it and making it go further down, it became, let's just build it into the system that's already broken. Mm-hmm. So how do we get more citizen scientists? Fuck if I know. Everything. We need to throw everything. We need to throw the entire kitchen sink at this. Yeah. Because it also is just important for our future. I mean, think of the crises that are coming down the road. There are more and more climate refugees that are coming to the United States and other places from places that can't support them anymore. And so we're gonna need to figure out things about how to actually better deal with the climate crisis we've created. How to deal with people migrating that are going to be, immigrants do not bring diseases, but when you have people constantly moving, diseases have an easier way of moving around. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying like immigrants have diseases, but I'm saying that when we constantly have people fleeing natural disasters, you can't go like, wait, you have COVID, you need to stay in your house in the middle of a hurricane. Like, people need to be able to move around.
Right.
And so we're having a more and more global world. We need to start dealing with zoonotic diseases, with the spread of diseases, with climate issues, with plastic pollution. I think the number of people that I see that are really concerned about microplastics, the 20th century mentality that chemistry will make everything better and we don't really need to think about it. I was talking to someone today who has charcoal at the bottom of their water bottle. Like, it's just, like, there are things that we need to start questioning things. And I think that's a really great example, though, of like how the science conversation has been poisoned. Fluorine in the water. Like, there's a really great podcast called Science Versus that's pretty established for looking at the scientific literature on a subject. And I think they did a really great job of highlighting that fluoride in water is a mixed bag. There are some ways that it's very good, and there are some ways that it's very bad. And so if you just have someone on the one side going like, no, let's get rid of all of it, it's all bad, it's all stupid, that's oversimplifying. And if you have the response go, well, that person mischaracterizes science a lot, so if he's saying fluoride is bad, fluoride must be good. I'm gonna take a bath in fluoride tonight. You're just like, what are you doing? Like, we need to be honest about things. Things are nuanced. Gray is the color of existence. It's not black and white. There are very few things that are black and white. So, again, I prompted myself to go off topic. I'm really bad at staying on any subject.
That's all right.
Again, how do we create more citizen scientists? I don't know. But we need every different tool in our tool set.
Do you have any ideas of a term that would be better than citizen scientist that we could use?
You know, there was a master's student who actually interviewed me a couple of years ago, like, that was floating a couple of ideas for this, and all of them sounded overworked. Yeah. You know, I think what's so fascinating is in the political sphere, the phrases and catchphrases that land and the ones that don't. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, you would go, there's no way in a million world you're gonna have like 1 million people chanting something dumb and then you'll have people do that. So I think what's tricky is, how do we remove that apology inside of it? Like, if you are an everyday person who does cool science in your everyday life, if you say everyday scientist, that does still also feel like you are apologizing. This is not, you're not a scientist, you're an everyday scientist. Yeah. It's a subcategory. And so I think what might be tricky is just, maybe it is creating more spaces like ChiTownBio, that if someone's worked here for a while, I don't think, if you have spent more than 20 hours in a month doing, 20 hours might be a lot, but some time in a month, like doing science, hard science, at the end of that month, if you've been working on culturing microbes or characterizing yeast or working with plant engineering, you get to call yourself a botanist, you get to call yourself a mycologist, you get to call yourself a scientist. And so maybe it's just removing the
citizen entirely.
Yeah, just we need to have more scientists. And I think it's, if we go back to what I was saying earlier, and it's not me, I didn't come up with this, but if science is just an outgrowth of philosophy, like it is epistemology, it's how we know what we know. It's one method of doing that. I think when someone says to you, like, I'm a little bit of a philosopher in my spare time, like, you don't question that. You don't go like, citizen philosopher or something like that. You just go like, yeah, okay, sometimes you're a bit of a philosopher, cool. I think we should be okay with someone going, sometimes I'm a bit of a scientist. I go into a lab, I do some work, I enjoy it. It's fun to be in a lab. Yeah. I think it's fun it's not the only way to be a scientist. It's fun to be in the field. It's fun to be in a lab. It's fun to be in a classroom. There are lots of ways to do it, but cool, do it. I really do think that qualifiers they're mini apologies. They're like, I'm not really this. And I think it allows us to also cook in a little bit of the imposter syndrome that keeps people from doing a lot of the stuff that they would otherwise be great at.
Yeah. So what is your hope for ChiTownBio, say 10 years from now?
I'm not going to be the person running anymore because I'll be able to take a nap. No, that's it's a great question, and I do think I'll probably still be here in some capacity. I won't be in charge anymore, hopefully. But you know, one of the things that's really great about the community biolabs that are in existence is they've found their purpose of being. They found their niche in the community. Both are acceptable. Oh, I hate when people say that. I've heard both. Sorry, but they found their niche in the community, and they have started to fulfill the purpose that everyone sees for them. I think GenSpace is a really great example of this. I think Biotech Without Borders, both of them in New York, are great examples of this. Bugs are great examples. They've started to figure out how they can serve their community. And I feel like I'm facing east, which is such a weird prompt that I didn't name any of the West Coast labs, but that has probably some insight to my psychology. Like they find those niches over time. And so hopefully we do too. And I think it would be cool if we had a robust bioart community that we were supporting in Chicago. Because I think scientists can be really shitty science communicators. And artists, their entire job is communication. And so I think that there are two schools of thought, that bioartists and artists, sci-art in general, are communicating science. And then there's one that they are critical of science. Let's just treat that as a spectrum, have everyone involved. You can be critical, you can be positive, you can just be looking at the whimsy or the artistry or the philosophy of the science, but just being involved. And it can be critical, it can be congratulatory, it can be explorative, but having that, I would love that in this lab. I would love it if we had a bunch of startups, and I would love it if when startups come out of ChiTownBio, they would start mentoring the next generation so that it became a continual process, that biotech was supporting biotech in a way that there's a clear ladder up and that people can start helping each other up that way. I would love it if this space had a really cool, robust publishing history, because I think that having scientists that are not in academia writing science papers might be a great way to remove that pedantry that we see in academia, and just get it down to these are the facts that are important. And I want to make sure that I can communicate this with, I remember the phrase in grad school is always like, talk about this like you would be talking to your grandmother. Incredibly sexist, also ageist. So I've always put it as like, think of your dumbest cousin. Try to explain what you do in science to your dumbest cousin, because it's non-gendered, and B, everyone has a stupid cousin. Like, this is gonna go out, and so my cousins will never watch this because they're stupid. That's not actually true. I just, yeah, sorry.
How do you ensure that the standards
That's a great question.
are maintained?
That's a great question, because I think that, you know, the peer review process that's part of science is flawed, but it's also great at making sure that, you know, we talk about Andrew Wakefield and how big of a piece of shit he is, just because he faked data, he tortured children for no reason. I mean, no, I think it's been, I mean, he was disbarred. Like, this is not a question. We've redone the research a million times, and look at how much chaos his nonsense trying to sell vaccines individually to discredit the MMR vaccine has just wrought chaos in society. It's literally killed people. So the peer review process, I think we look to Andrew Wakefield and go, like, look at this is what happens when it fails. But think of how many Andrew Wakefields we've prevented by just going like, we have researchers who are experts on this, they're going, I'm not convinced. And so I think one of the things we have to start doing is, if we have scientists that are working in community biolabs, it would be really great if we start publishing, if we can go to people at Bugs or at BioCurious or at ChiTownBio and be able to go like, you guys know this too. We can provide you all of our data, look over it. Does this hold up to your eyes? And I think what's nice is that if we do start to blend some of these boundaries, it would be great if we could get some of the premier scientists in the country to start the all-stars of science. to review a paper that came out of Citizen Science Lab, and a Citizen Science, I used that Citizen Science Lab even though I just, out of a Community Bio Lab, and then have a Community Bio Lab maybe write a review or be part of a review panel for a research paper that is coming out of a lab at the Broad Institute or at Berkeley or at Stanford or at the University of Michigan. It'd be really cool if we could get to the point where we could understand that those viewpoints and those critiques are going to be really meaningful. But it also has to mean that we have to have a level of rigor in our space too, because if we are doing, I don't know, volcanoes with vinegar and baking soda all day and just going like, it's biology because vinegar? It's an organic compound, it's from a fermentation. Like, if that's all we're doing, yeah, I can see why researchers at Northwestern were like, I'm not going to send a review paper to them to look over it. This is not going to be preventing a Wakefield. This is going to be, I don't know what that would be. So, like, you know, what's nice is that we're setting up right now a community, a scientific review board for our lab that if people are working here, there are tons of people who want to participate, but we haven't been able to figure out how to get them to participate. It'd be great if people start an experiment that they can reach out to board scientists or to academics that they can just go, hey, I will help you with this. I have a PhD in this background. I can work with you on this, or I have a master's in this and I can read over it because I've read over a billion things like this, or I'm working in a lab but I have a little bit of spare time to do that. So I think we're trying to make sure that things here are up to a certain standard, and I think we also have a bunch of people that are looking from above to make sure that we're safe, that we're living up to our responsibilities to our community, that we are BSL1, biosafety level 1. We are making sure that we're not working with anything that could lead to a pathogen, that could down the road lead to something dangerous. How do we make sure that we are holding ourselves to these specific standards? So I think it's making sure that this lab has a clear trajectory and has the protocols in place to make sure that we are staying on that path.
Your background is molecular biologist with emphasis in synthetic biology.
You've read one of my biographies that's somewhere, because I think I wrote that.
Could you talk a little bit about the controversy surrounding synthetic biology?
Yes. So I think what's really tricky is a lot of the controversy surrounding synthetic biology is the same thing that is one of the controversies with community bio too. So synthetic biology is the idea that we can engineer living systems. So sometimes it's an organism, sometimes it's a cell-free system, but things that have some of the qualities and properties of life. Sometimes it's entire ecosystems or communities. We can engineer them by playing around with their genetics or the way that they're communicating with each other or something to create a novel function that we can then use to build tools for biotechnology. I think that's the easiest way that I would describe synthetic biology. I think there are going to be people who are going to nitpick that back and forth, that there has to be some genetic component alterations, or it has to have a living system, but I think a lot of times these definitions are more of a highlight of the limitations of the English language than they are a highlight of the limitations of the science. But synthetic biology was scary for a lot of people at first, just because when you're engineering life, there are a lot of people who are opposed to genetic engineering. And I think that's also based on the way we've talked about it, the way that it's been applied in society, the way that we've monetized a lot of it. There are lots of problems with the way we do it, but the fundamentals aren't a problem. I mean, I guess that is individual too. But I think we should be able to talk about how with genetic engineering, and this is a whole nother bag of worms, but when we talk about a natural apple, let's talk about a Granny Smith apple. Apple trees usually live, I believe, 80 years. The Granny Smith apple was found in the late 1800s in Australia, I believe by a woman who was named Smith, and she was a grandmother, so cool. But like, how can you have a natural Granny Smith apple when, if you plant a seed from an apple, they're like people. Their seeds are going to be different from that parent. We've grafted and cloned it all around the world. What does a natural Granny Smith apple look like? What does that mean? natural is a bullshit term that we've just put into things. And so genetic engineering, we've steered engineering for organisms. Look at the pug. It's, depending on how you look at it, either a type of wolf or a distinct species that's Canis familiaris, but it's something that we've bred it to look like that, to have all those health defects that we think are cute and funny, even though it's kind of depressing if you think about how much we've messed up pugs. But that's a whole nother story. But I think that we should be asking ethical questions about it, but I don't think that saying like we shouldn't do GMOs because inherently messing with genetics is one thing. That's cool. It's a misunderstanding of human history and the technologies that we rely on to survive and eat. So I think that's a component that led to some controversy with synthetic biology. There's also this idea that if scientists are focused on a goal, like if we're engineering a system to do this, is it one of those things that is ends justifying the means? It comes down to like a moralistic concern about it. And I think that maybe we should be working with more ethicists, although I've worked with some really great ethicists, people who I really love, and ethicists who I don't. That'd be the easiest way to put it. So there's some of that concern. There's also concern with, if you do engineer all these organisms, what happens if they get out? How do we make sure that they're limiting the impact on the environment? Which is weird because like people will drive their car to a protest to go like, whoa, 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 scientists, you haven't thought about how this is affecting the environment. Let me get back in my Hummer. I'm gonna drive home. And you're like, all right, cool. The moral outrage doesn't match the consistency of how you live your life, but whatever. But there's this, so there's concerns with that. I think whenever there's a new field, but I think what's really tricky is synthetic biology is a new field in the same way that bioart is a new field. When I talk about bioart, there are I work with Eduardo Katz, who coined the term, and a lot of times people will start the history of bioart with Eduardo. The earliest writing we have for people is about brewing beer. How is that not an art form with biology? We do topiary, there's bonsai, there's gardens. These are all art that's been done with biology for years. When we start something or when we coin a term, that doesn't mean it's the actual start point. And so I think synthetic biology came out of a lot of other fields, but it's a concern just because it's new. When you have something new, you build a new tool, you think about what are the limitations of this, what should we pose in the limitations of it, and it's a good thing to have that reflection, but I think it can't be paralyzing either. We have to figure out how to move forward, but move forward responsibly. And so I think that's something that a lot of synthetic biologists think about too. So it's not in a vacuum. I don't think synthetic biologists are all wearing capes and twisting their like mustaches and just going like, how do we fuck up the earth? They're people, and I think there are great synthetic biologists with great ethics. There are synthetic biologists who are just the most morally corrupt people in the world. I'm not going to name names, but I might have mentioned one of the names earlier in this. That just cool, but that's everything. That's going to be true of business people. It's going to be true of restaurant owners. It's going to be true of waiters and waitresses. So it's also making sure that everyone is involved in the understanding of it. It goes back to that science education, because if society has more of an input in what we want, where we want science to go, if there are more spaces where people can feel like, oh, I can understand this a little bit better, I can get my hands wet, and actually say, oh, there are better ways to do this. Maybe we can actually start rewarding people who are doing good science at the same way at a societal level too. Maybe it's one of the reasons why it's easy to understand what makes a great football player, because anyone can pick up a football and play with their friends and realize, oh, you can't throw a spiral. Oh no, that was humiliating. You should never do this again. But it makes you appreciate what a good football player looks like and why it would be impressive if someone can consistently catch a throw that was a 70-yard pass. Like that is impressive if you have that experience. But if you never get to do a science course after you had the worst science teacher in 8th grade who told you like, you're not that good at this, and then go like, I'm never gonna go back to that, it's going to be really hard to gauge what a good science paper is. So, did I get really far off topic again?
No, we're,
okay,
we're
all right,
doing
cool.
good. What? So have you always been interested in biology?
I don't know. Yes and no, maybe. I don't know. I feel like I've loved learning. So I think I used to, one of my exes is a history, he was getting his PhD in history at the time. And I think one of the things that was fascinating was that he would get annoyed at how much I love historical markers. If there is a marker on a building that will tell you a little bit about where you're at, oh, that's cake right there. That's fun. Like, it's just, I like that, knowing about the world around you. And I think that going back to that philosophy of epistemology, science is a great tool to learn how you know what you know. And I think that it's fun to be told things, but experimentalism is just such a powerful tool in, I don't want to say self-soothing, because that sounds like it's pseudo therapy talk, but it's just that it's relaxing to go, not only do I know this, I'm the person who figured out, I did this experiment. One of the things I tell my students about that is both ridiculous but true is I remember when I think I was 3, but probably around 4, I went to a Montessori in Romeo, Michigan. Shout out to Romeo, Michigan. But it is it's a great weird little town. I was at a Montessori and there was a honeysuckle bush behind the place. And they had the biggest bumblebees always on that honeysuckle bush. And I remember asking people, like, they're fuzzy. Everything that I've encountered that's fuzzy, dogs, stuffed animals, end of list. Like, I'm trying to think of other things that are fuzzy, like some flowers and plants. Like, if it's fuzzy, it's fun to touch. So bumblebees, they're fun to touch, right? And people will be like, no, don't touch that bumblebee, 3-year-old. Don't do this. And so I had a hypothesis. I did some research. I looked at the data that I had previously collected with all of my stuffed animals. Fuzzy is fun. And then I touched a bumblebee that was on this honeysuckle bush, and no shit, it stung me. And then I reported my results to everyone with a lot of tears and a lot of whining, because I was such a whiny little kid. But that's fundamentally going through the scientific method. That is, forming a question, collecting data, forming a hypothesis, setting up your experiments, doing an experiment, reporting your data. That's the scientific method, pretty much. So one of my earliest memories is going through the scientific method. I mean, that might be a different way of phrasing it than other people, though. Someone might just go, I remember getting stung as a little kid because I was dumb enough to think that a bumblebee would be soft.
Right.
But they're so fluffy. Like, it's still fun to look at a bumblebee and go, like, I wish I could just put a little wax on its stinger so that it wasn't able to sting me. I would still love to pet a bumblebee. That just seems like it would be fun.
Yeah.
But I think that's you learn more in your life that is cool. And I think I have a bunch of genetic anomalies. I have Gilbert syndrome. So I don't process bilirubin properly. And every once in a while I get a little bit of jaundice and I turn a little yellow, which is weird. I feel like what's very strange is sometimes I'm holding bags and I'll just pull forward and I'm like, oh, your hand's really yellow today. And it's just cool, it happens. I am a carrier for thalassemia. And my dad will tell stories of cousins who died of thalassemia major, because I'm a carrier, I don't have the full-blown disease, but that does affect me. And I'm at this is a BSL-1 lab, so I can't like sample some of my own blood and just look at how fucked up my red blood cells are, even though they're fucked up and I really want to see them one day. But someday it's not happening here because I have to play by my own rules, which is just fair. But I think you learn about things like that and you're like, oh, all right, how does that contextualize everything else around? And I think what's so fascinating is in like the genetics class I teach at the Art Institute, we talk for a really long time about eugenics, because I think that especially at a space where there is more philosophy, then my students are not going on to typically go to med school, but it would be cool if one of them did. But I want to make sure that we can talk through the philosophy behind a lot of the science. So now I want to talk about how biology has been abused. And so at one point we have to talk about Linus Pauling, because Linus Pauling is just a ghost that haunts me around because he's fascinating. He's just a weird dude. Do you know a lot about Linus Pauling?
I don't.
He's, it's if you were to make up a character for a scientist in the 20th century, he's weirder than that. So he's the reason we take Airborne, the vitamin C tablets, because at the end of his life he was just like, vitamin C for everything. You get vitamin C. You get everyone gets vitamin C. He was the Oprah of vitamin C. He incorrectly identified the structure of DNA as a triple helix, but he also figured out a lot about how chemical bonds work, and so he won a Nobel Prize for chemistry. And then he was really anti-nuclear arms, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize. He's the only person who's won 2 independent Nobel Prizes. Suck on that, Marie Curie, because she shared one with her husband, who she clearly was carrying along. Should have just ditched him, and then she would have been the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes on her own. But she is also a genius, but that's neither here nor there. But he was the first person to figure out, or some people in his lab. So there are 2 researchers in his lab who deserve most of the credit for it. But they figured out that sickle cell anemia is a genetic disease. And it's passed along through families, and you can trace this. You can look at how the structure of hemoglobin changes with this mutation, and if you put it in an electrical field, they'll move slightly differently because it loses a charged residue in the mutation to a neutral residue, so the electrical field will affect that protein slightly differently. And so Linus Pauling, as soon as he had this information, and I think this is where it goes from science to application. This is where it's science to engineering, and at this point, social engineering. It was like, oh, if this is genetic, I have a great idea. We are going to just tattoo everyone who has any genetic disease. We'll just put a little S on their forehead for sickle cell anemia, and that way, when people go on dates, because people only date to have babies. That's the end of the story. It's to find a spouse and have a baby in the long run. So when you go on a date and you see someone else with that, you're like, oh, this isn't gonna work out. And so we can prevent anyone from ever getting full-blown sickle cell anemia. Cool, end of story. We just got to tattoo everyone in the face, which, to be fair, I believe it's the late 1940s, early 1950s. Contextually, tattooing people to keep track of people was a bad idea at that point. Like, just let's think about recent history at that point, Linus. But it was the best of intentions, horrible idea. Because we already find ways to judge people. Just think about everyone who is a carrier for cystic fibrosis or a carrier for sickle cell. Going around with a tattoo on their forehead, it's going to affect their mental health. It's going to affect the way society judges them and acts with them. But I always think about this. I'm a carrier for thalassemia. What would it be like to go around with a T on my forehead all the time, just going like, first thing you learn about me is my height, my hair color, my eye color, and that I am a carrier for thalassemia. Like, that would be very weird. And so I think it's when you run into these full stories of history and science and sociology and all these, it's exciting. And I think I knew that my strength was more in the science than those other fields. And so why not stick around here? And then there's also just amazing people that are inspiring. I constantly cite Rachel Carson as a reason for being at the Art Institute, for doing science. It's just like Rachel Carson single-handedly changed the world in so many different ways. And what's so fascinating is Yale has all of her paperwork, and you can look, she was starting to get letters from people going like, you know, it's really weird. Animals are migrating further north than they should be. The seasonality of things are weird. It's almost like the climate is changing. And so in 1960s, she was already collecting data to start writing about climate change, but then she got breast cancer and tragically died while being attacked by the chemical industry. She's just another, look at Rachel Carson, it's amazing. But it's just, I think that it's fun to see how people can use science to really, I've always been thoughtful of the environment. I'm not going to go through my credentials right now because that's weirdly braggadocious. But I care a lot about it. And so seeing someone who is just a really underestimated, really cool writer, great scientist, just go like, all right, I'm going to lay out this for everyone. And then we have Fox News segments that are like, did Rachel Carson kill people with malaria? Yes, she did. And you're like, fuck you for misrepresenting this so horribly. But I think the question is, why am I a scientist? I don't know, lots of things. Yeah. Like, I like biology, it's fun. I don't know if biology, my first love was chemistry. My undergraduate degree is in, it was, originally I was gonna be pre-pharmacy, and then I realized, I don't wanna do that. Then I was chemistry, and then I liked chemistry when there was moving parts and living things that could mess around with it. So I was chemistry and biochemistry. And then molecular biology was just I am a lucky individual. The things that I have figured out and the ways I've run into in my life have been so luck-based. And so I've had cool opportunities, I've gone cool places, I've said yes to a lot of weird things, and they've been fun. And so I don't know how I ended up here. People ask me, I'm technically an art professor at the Art Institute. I teach in art and technology studies. I also teach in liberal arts, but I teach as an art professor. I've never taken an art course after high school. I love it. It's fun. I do know a lot more about bioart than 99% of people, but at the same time, how the hell did I get here? Just saying yes to things.
Yeah.
That sounds too pie in the sky, whatever that phrase is, but it's just like, just say yes to everything and your dreams will come true. It's the secret, which is not science. So Oprah is not a scientist, which is why the 2 doctors she gave the community have been just giant shits and stains on the Dr. Oz and Dr. Phil. Yeah, they're great people, great scientists. So,
What what's been the last book?
Not stayed on topic at all.
That's all right.
Sorry.
What's the last book of fiction that you've read?
Ooh, fiction. I really love graphic novels. And that is such a cop-out because I would love to say that I was reading a lot because I do think that it is a good use of your time. It does use your brain up, but I'm too lazy. I'm reading papers and then I'm grading papers and I'm looking up research for this lab and I don't want to. So I do a lot of graphic novels. I think I just purchased a book called The Life of Melody, and it's a queer love story, and I'm a sucker for shit like that. So as a queer man, so but yeah, it was a good book. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I feel like it was in a set of graphic novels I bought recently, and I just got John Lewis's autobiography. That's the comic book for him. So good. It's so good. I didn't realize. I feel like everyone knows to respect John Lewis, but like, holy shit, John Lewis did some shit. So it was just, yeah, that was fun too. But that's not fiction. It's weird because there's clearly some scenarios in it that you're like, did these children come to your office and talk about chickens for a while? I don't think so. But I'm not also accusing John Lewis of lying because the book is great and it's wonderful, but it's also, I don't think he talked about chickens that much with children in his office. Yeah. But I think sometimes you have to tell a good story to ground the better story, and if people understand what John Lewis did, better for it. So, again, really off topic for an easy question. Sorry.
What advice would you have for a young and upcoming scientist?
I think what's so tricky about that question is it's asking for a one-size-fits-all piece of advice. Mm-hmm. And I think what's so weird is that I've had people ask for advice just because I've been running a networking event. They're like, oh, you know about career advice? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, because so much of it's economic and where things are going, and I don't know where biotech is going. No one knows where biotech is going. And so people are like, should I go to grad school? Should I go into industry? Should I take time off between grad and undergrad? I think that people inherently should trust themselves more. I think sometimes people have too big of an ego and then they trust themselves too much. But trusting yourself, trusting the people around you, making sure that you are working on yourself and making sure that you are self-aware. I try to do that. I don't know if I'm the best at it either. But like just knowing your own limitations. I think recently I figured out I was a bad grad student. Like my project didn't work the way I wanted to, and my boss was handling a bunch of grad students. And so there were things that were moving forward, and you move forward on the things you can move forward on. And so when my things kind of stalled, it was like, oh, well, he's not paying as much attention to me. So I could probably just fade into the background and play a lot of flash games while I'm doing some other experiments and still move forward, but just a lot slower. And so, like, I think at the time I was not aware of it, but then I remember telling one of my friends from my lab, like, do you know I think I was a really bad grad student? And she was like, yeah, everyone knew you were a bad grad student. It was fun to have you in the lab, but you were not doing good shit. So it was like, it's having that self-awareness, figuring out how you actually what you should be doing. I think there is a really great scientist that I'm going to fuck up her name. This is the problem. She has 3 names, and I always scramble 3 names. So it's either Elizabeth Ayanna Johnson or Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She is a marine biologist who was one of the writers of the Blue New Deal. And she used to have this podcast called How to Save a Planet, but she quit doing it for a couple of reasons, just over schedule, and also Joe Rogan and his making Spotify a scientific disinformation network. But she had this really great Venn diagram of what people should be doing with their life for the climate, was figuring out what are you good at, what do you like doing, and what needs to get done. And I think that's just good questions for your life in general. Like, so think about it in terms of the climate, but think about it in your life. What do you like doing? What are you good at? And what needs to get done? And that takes a little bit of self-reflection, because what are you good at? There are so many people who think, I'm good at everything. No, you're not. No, you're not. I really am grateful to my parents, because one of the things that, and this is gonna sound bleak, but my parents would always tell me, like, you know, in any set of people, there are gonna be people who are better than you at a lot of the things in your life. And I think that's something that people need to hear. Like, there are smarter scientists, there are better communicators, but like, if you like it and you have some skill in it, you can hone that skill, you can get better, you can do better. You might not ever be the best. I could, I don't know, play basketball every day, and I am not going to ever be in the NBA because I'm short and I'm not athletic or coordinated. But I mean, it's sad. But there's that, I think it is working on that self-awareness and then answering those 3 questions and then figuring out how to move forward. What do you like doing? What are you good at? What needs to get done?
Yep.
That was really roundabout, but I think I answered that.
Yes.
Yeah. Lightning round is not going hot, so sorry. All right, what was the next one?
Next one. How is your work as a molecular biologist and creator of ChiTownBio? How has that impacted your humanity?
Ooh. You know, I think that we all have assumptions about a lot of things in our life. And so I think when I started ChiTownBio, or when I had the idea for a community biolab when I was at Ellen Jorgensen's talk, like the first time I thought, oh, this will be easy, failed. Second time I tried it, I was in the red eye, failed. Third time I tried it, like navigating the people that we were interacting with, navigating the people who are going, you're moving too slow, we're gonna do this on our own without you. The people who are like interested in other aspects than me. The people who came to meetings going, what are you doing if you're doing it BSL2? BSL2 means you're putting restrictions, or BSL1. We should be BSL2 right away. We should have people working with human cell lines immediately, and like go, holy shit. No. And then especially with a fermenter, with interacting with people in the biotech community who are looking for jobs, who are between jobs, who are smarter than you or more social than you, or all these things, but are struggling to figure out how to fit into the thing. I think that every time you learn one of these things about that the world is different than you think it is, it makes you reflect on like your own biases in other parts of your life. So I think science is the same thing. Like when you are really sure that something is going to work one way, and you have to redo an experiment, refigure out your protocols, rework things, have things fail. Failure is a great teacher in science, and I think it's something that humbles you, and it also changes the way that you approach the next question. And if you're paying attention, that means that you're changing a little bit of your own identity, and it's informative to see how you're changing over time too. So I don't know. How has it made you? It's a really good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for it, but it's something I'm going to definitely think about a lot. And I think maybe that forming ChiTownBio has made me more thoughtful about things like that, because you can't run into so many people with so many different stories and so many different takes on things, so many different ideas and dreams without questioning yourself a little bit. So I think that it's made me more thoughtful about my context, what I'm doing here. I think what's so tricky too is that, you know, we had a meeting with a politician's office, and I was definitely coached beforehand of like, don't talk about your politics. Your politics are different from this politician's. But it was just, they were like, when you talk about the lab, you're not talking about expanding citizen science or bioart. This politician wants to know about job retraining and startups. And so you're shifting the way you talk about it. And being aware of how much the narrative you tell yourself, and then the narrative you tell others, and how much of that's true, and how much can you learn about that, the way that you are talking, and how much of it's true, how much of it, if you change the way you talk about it, have you changed the inherent truth value of what you're saying? It's something to think about all the time. I've also been listening to a lot of philosophy podcasts lately, so David Hume's somewhere in the back of my head yelling at me all the time. So, although he was supposed to be a really friendly and likable and jolly person, but he's yelling at me a lot, so.
Well, Andy, I appreciate the time.
I'm sorry that I ate so much of yours, but
No,
this was fun.
It's been great.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that.